Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. And today I look like a tangerine, but my wife said it brings out the color of my eyes. And we are blessed to have Jared White on the show. He is the CEO and co-founder of Matey. And today we're going to talk about how a 16-year AI quant trader built a go-to-market in legal AI by attacking his own category, and what selling trust to skeptical, high-stakes buyers teaches every revenue leader. Jared, in a minute, tell us who you are, what do you do, and why should anybody stay on here for the next hour to hear what we have to say?
Well, thank you for having me, Shane. It's wonderful to meet you. And so, in a nutshell, I'm Jared White. I live in Austin, Texas. I've been in software for 30 years now. Got in software when I was 16, and ultimately found AI, which is what I was always wanting to do in the first place. And I would read these books, like the Tom Swift and the sort of ancient sci-fi, and think, man, it'd be really cool if we actually had a robot like a C-3PO or an R2-D2, that sort of thing. Always wanted to build one, and then found AI, and then of course with ChatGPT, whenever that came out in 2022, it's like, okay, we might be close. So here we are, and so we built Matey. And legal is an area where it's like the first mate in the Matey ecosystem. We have this, I'm going to be a $1 trillion company one day, hopefully, and have a bunch more mates. But legal mate is is the first one because it's the most rigorous and the most demanding. And so if you can crack the problem of hallucinations, if you can crack the problem of trust, then the rest of it is sort of downstream, and it's much easier to come to grips with. And so we built Matey. Essentially, you can think of it like it's a ChatGPT or an Anthropic Claude, where only your data in your case, your legal matter, is providing the answers to that system. And that works at petabyte scale. It's not just like a 5 gigabytes and pray that the context window is large enough. It works at petabyte scale. So, and that's where we are. It's a wonderful product.
Wow. So that is a lot. So look, guys, this episode is going to be a little bit different. Jared's not a career sales leader. He spent, 16 years building neural net. So you're going to have to dumb this down for people who are not going to understand this language, but building neural net and reinforcement learning systems to trade equities and futures, know a bit about equities and futures, but then you pointed that same system brain at criminal defense. Correct. So your whole GTM is the opposite of hype. You call most legal AI snake oil and tech theater, and sells against it. So a quant who forecasts pipeline and a builder who sells trust to a non-technical buyer. This is very fresh ground for this audience. Look, just quickly, we want to tell them, how did you meet me?
I met you through a wonderful friend of mine, Andrew Bose. And I'd love to tell you how I met Andrew, but Andrew Bose runs an awesome organization called Darwinian Ventures, who has essentially been sort of the brain trust of how we have built our go-to-market at Matey. So we, and I sat down with him at a dinner. It just happened to be that I was at a dinner in, I believe, September of last year, 2025. And, you go around the table as they typically do, and they're like, hey, how do you, what do you need help with? It was a CEO dinner for Alumni Ventures, who's on our cap table. And I'm like, well, I could use some help with go-to-market. And just, we've tried to build some things and tried to hire some people, and it kind of didn't work out. Had a couple of guys that I had basically hired, was ready to start, and then they tell me they have a 1-year non-compete. I was like, man, that could have been useful information like 6 weeks ago. So that happens a couple of times, and finally get a guy to start, and then that doesn't work out. He just, we're too small for him. He didn't want to make phone calls, and so I'm like, I understand. And then ultimately, a couple months later, meet Andrew from Darwinian, and I'm like, yeah, I need some help with this. And he's like, cool, it happens to be I do that. And so here we are, and that's how I met you.
It's a great story. Like, Andrew is one of the nicest guys I've ever met, right? I met Andrew 5 years ago when I started to build my agency, and I had a customer who wasn't paying their bill. And Andrew said to me, shut your service off. And I said, all right, fine. The client went berserk. I told Andrew, and he was like, you didn't really tell him to do that, did you? You didn't really. And I said, yes, I did. You told me to. And he said, all right, cool. And you know what? They paid the next week. Yeah. And 5 years after that, Andrew is also an investor in RevIntel. So a very small world. And again, it's those people that you never expect are going to be the ones in your fighting corner. So let's jump into it. From the trading floor to the courtroom, what a journey. You spent
Yeah.
16 years building neural net and reinforcement learning systems to trade equities and futures. What does that work teach you about separating signal from noise that you still use every day at Matey?
Well, that's a great question. So I can think of that in a couple of different categories. One being the sales pipeline, which is probably more interesting to your audience. The other being how we deal with managing petabytes of data coming to our system, like what does and doesn't matter from just an operational perspective. And then lastly, separating signal from noise in terms of whenever a user says, hey, I need an answer to my question, and it happens to be that I have 18 terabytes of data in your system related to my case. Like, I need an answer. I need it within 5 minutes, and I need you to not just make it up. You've got to run through a bunch of data and figure out what does and doesn't matter. And ultimately, the way that we built these trading models, you start off in the early days before everyone was doing it. I was building quantitative systems, the early type of quantitative systems in 2006 to trade the markets. And largely that was just like, hey, get me out of a bad trade. So the variable is I'm losing money on the trade and I must be ignoring it. So just get me out of it, and so it's automating that for me. And then it moves on towards like, here's some other additional factors that are going in. Maybe there's, what the stock is doing for the day. Maybe there's what the S&P is doing for the day and so forth. You gradually start to create more signal or signals, as we say. And then some point, you have too many to manage. And so you're like, well, which ones of these matter? Which ones of these don't? And eventually you realize that you have to build the model that builds the models. Like you can't go about building a custom model for every one of the 7,000 stocks in the stock market. You have to build a system for building the models and learning the signals that actually work and the ones that don't. And so you have to have an evaluation loop and, some sort of training cycle. And then, ultimately it's so many things are path dependent with trading and so, you can only buy up to a certain point. You can only sell to a certain point. If you're flat, it means a different type of trade than if you're long or if you're short. And so every time you're making a decision, all those factors matter. And that's where we bring into the human intuition or the mimicry of human intuition, we hope, which is reinforcement learning. And so you give the reinforcement learner an objective, which is to make more money and to not lose money. And so you learn an objective reward model for that. And then you basically train the entire thing on the entire corpus of data every week. And it takes like 3,000 or 4,000 computers to do that. So that's the start to finish on quantitative trading.
Yeah.
How that applies to us, I'll talk about the sales stuff from the first perspective, because I was watching some of your previous podcasts. And, we were talking about like, you might have like a really amazing pipeline, but then none of it's converting. And so what do you do then? And it might be better, and you, by the way, you probably know the answer to that better than I do. But your intuition is to be trusted before mine on that. But, my intuition on this is like, well, maybe it's better to have fewer opportunities that are of higher quality. So then do we need a complete reset, or are there signals that we can basically use to filter out, and that's kind of part of that discovery and that qualification process. And then of course, this is the part of it that isn't like quantitative trading, but like the human psychology around it, where we disqualified people and then all of a sudden they really want to become a customer, and then they actually become a really great customer. We've even had instances much like what you described where, clients not paying their bill, and then you turn their service off and then they do want to pay their bill. And, Andrew, help me with this. There was an instance, a guy threatened to sue me because we hadn't he had this enormous data set and he wanted us to put it in, and we're going to get like $1,000 out of this. And at some point he's really mad at me, and I'm like, hey, bro, you're going to have $1,000 back. And he's like, oh, no, I haven't even given you $1,000. But it's going to cost me $30,000 if I go elsewhere, and I'm going to sue you for $30,000 because you're not doing it for me. And I was like, yeah, you're definitely getting your data back. And and then Andrew turns that into, I think, a $35,000 a year customer. So sometimes, that push pull. There's other types of human signal that goes into this.
Yeah. You need to be intuitive. You need to be malleable, and you need to be, one of Andrew's favorite lines is adaptable to change. So yes. I want to ask you, from money to justice, you could have kept building trading systems and printing money, right? You walked away to build AI for criminal defense, which is a very sticky up and down industry. I think, well, there's a lot of consistencies around it, but whatever. What was the moment the trading game stopped being enough for you?
That's a great question. I think I ran my trading desk. I actually had two different trading desks, and then worked for a quantitative firm here in Austin, Texas, for about 16 or 18 months in between those two things. And whenever I built my last trading desk, I started building that in 2018, early 2018, and I ran that through the end of 2022. And I started to, I have servers in NASDAQ, Carteret Data Center, servers at the NYSE in MAWA, etc. You kind of have all the things that you sort of aspire to have to do that type of trading. And I just essentially got bored with it. And it happened to be serendipitous with the time frame that the language models and the foundational models sort of came onto the scene.
Hmm.
And I had temporarily I was still running my desk just like a solo, and had taken a job as the director of machine learning for a crypto. It's like basically an NFT. It was an NFT. Um, think of it as like a illiquid asset valuation modeling system.
Hmm.
And brought in one of my top data scientists, who ultimately became a co-founder of my business here. And we built some really cool stuff in the NFT space, which also sort of like went away about
Yeah.
9 months later.
Yeah.
Not only with the fall of FTX, but with the Silicon Valley Bank going under and so forth, right?
Yeah.
And so all of this sort of serendipitously happens at the same time, and I'm like, okay, enough of this other stuff that doesn't really matter. Like, language models are actually going to change the world, because um, we've been teaching computers how to do math for a really long time, and now we can teach them how to read and write. And
Hmm.
so this is actually, I think, the future. This gets us closer to, you can't just have R2D2. You also have to have C3PO, to borrow from Star Wars here. And so that's what pushed me. I was like, I want to do something with language models and foundational models, whatever that something is.
Hmm.
So I helped out a friend who was starting something, and they were going to do essentially revenue optimization and conversion optimization on shopping websites and so forth. That was pretty cool. Just one, and then I knew I was building something that was going to be a large data set, get answers from it. I wanted to build, essentially the thing that captures the corpus of your life and then gives you answers. And so I knew that's what I wanted to build, and I wanted to build it for myself. I had a lot of things going on. It's like, I want something that
Hmm.
just tells me what I need to be doing while I'm asleep.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, legal just found its way to us more than we found our way to legal, and that is what caused us to wind up focusing on criminal defense. But it's not just a criminal defense product. What I would say is that criminal defense, in fact, most of our focus on sales today is in the civil space. There's 10 or maybe 50 times even as much money in the civil space as there's in the criminal space. It just
Wow.
happens to be that criminal is the like 50 to 60% of the product that you need to be able to sell civil. So it's a great market for us to start off the product with
Okay.
without building it.
That's very interesting. Look, you posted about building that B2B shopping cart for, is it for BP Europe 26 years ago? Is that right?
And that was not it. That was a completely different company. And I probably shouldn't say the name, because I haven't talked to them in a bit. I'm not sure what they're doing. So I don't want to like oversell or undersell what their current focus is. This was like 2 or 3 years ago. But I did build a B2B shopping cart in the year 2000 for BP Europe through a company
And
called Sarah.
it was 70 hours. Before this, it was 70-hour weeks. So petrol stations could order gasoline online. But
Yeah,
the question from that is, what from that very first build still shows up in how you build things today?
great question. Um, Reliability, and anytime you have data sets like that. So BP Europe, there was also BP Asia, and BP North America that we were working on. My focus was on the BP Europe project, which was the first to go live. Ultimately, fun fact: I was actually communicating with some folks on LinkedIn that were on that project with me. Very good friend of mine. We became very good friends because we spent 70 hours a week together
Yeah.
for a good while, and became very good friends. anyway, we were talking on LinkedIn about this, and as it turns out, like we built this whole stuff, all this website, and we were trying to move the needle on how long it took them to order gasoline from like 6 hours to like 30 minutes. And so I think we wound up getting them to 5, but they still wound up using the phone. So they would basically build their pricing quote stuff, and then they would still call, and they just, they used it to figure out what they wanted.
Yeah.
And it didn't, it wasn't the back and forth on quoting. They still never just clicked the button. They couldn't get their head around clicking the button and paying for it that way, which is fascinating.
Right.
But in terms of like, so you have like millions upon millions of data points, and you just can't really do that. You can't human spot check that. And so you have, again, back to the notion of building the models that build the models. We build the software that builds the software now.
Mm,
And
okay.
as I'm sure you're familiar with things like Cursor, Claude
Yep.
Code, Codex, we build an enormous amount of software today. In comparison to where we were a year ago, even, and my God, 26 years ago, the amount of code that we wrote those 26 years ago, like I could probably have done, like I could have typed up something for Cursor and have it finished before the end of this podcast. Give me 5 minutes here or there to go monitor it. That's how crazy that is, right? So 3 people,
That is
5 people.
incredible.
But now you have to build the systems that build the systems. That's what gives us that exponential step, not just a step function, but an exponential function return on our time as compared to a year ago. And now we're building, what we did back then was we built half of that system that we built was essentially a checking engine. And then today, what we're building is essentially a verification engine for whenever we release a new fine-tuned model, or whenever we release a new workflow evaluation algorithm, a new search engine, etc. Whenever we're releasing that, most of that code is not that particular engine. It is the verification validation cycles that go into it. That's what I take away from it, is that quality matters. Um, you know, it's better to be a little bit late sometimes and accurate than it is to be early and lose trust. That's what I take
That
away
makes a lot
from
of
it. Yeah.
sorry, my camera literally, give me 1 second. I think
Yeah,
my
you went
phone just
fuzzy.
died. Okay, so the next segment we want to talk about, you took on a journey to sell against your own category, and the core message is that most legal AI is considered snake oil and tech theater. You're an AI founder telling buyers to distrust AI. That is a very risky way to sell, but why is that the smartest move you could make?
Well, all right. Here's what I'll say is that selling to lawyers is different than selling to other people. I'm just going to go ahead and let the cat out of the bag. And it's actually one of the reasons why it's difficult to get companies like this, legal. It was difficult very early on to get anything legal software, legal tech funded by venture, because everyone just had bad experiences selling into the legal profession. And so fundamentally, and I have some theories about why, which I'll share. The first and foremost, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, language models allowed us to teach computers how to read. Previously, we've taught them how to write, how to do math. So now we can teach them to read and write, which is what the majority of lawyers do. I can't tell you the number of lawyers who have told me before, lawyers are just people, they're smart people that weren't good at STEM, and so we went to law school instead of going to, some of the type of engineering school. And I believe them. In
Mhm.
fact, I can't tell the number of lawyers I've hired as software engineers, and I think that they actually oftentimes make better software engineers than many mathematicians, because we think in a lot of the same patterns. And so once language models became a thing, all of the other legal tech software that has previously been written doesn't need to be in existence anymore. And so those things only really, in my view, I'll say
Mhm.
this like in a bit of an extreme way, those things only exist because language models didn't exist. All right. And they're sort of like band-aids on the problem. And in much the same way, like, a covered wagon is a band-aid on the problem of transportation before you have, a wonderful SUV that you can ride around in. And so that's the way I think about the existing software stack that existed prior to 2023. Now, with that said, the lawyers have been sold a bill of goods on this kind of stuff for 30, 40 years. And they're all very skeptical because none of these things really lived up to the hype. None of these things really lived up to the promise. And so it was initially very early on, like it must have been 3 months in, and someone was basically hallucinating cases and presenting it to the courtroom. And
Hmm.
everyone sort of gets this notion that AI is essentially not going to be trustworthy. And I tell them, you're absolutely right. It probably isn't going to be trustworthy unless you're building the systems in a way that force it to be trustworthy. And so proof is in the pudding. Use the software and see what the outcomes are. So we sell to them because we know in a fashion um, that addresses their skepticism head on, as opposed to trying to sell them the snake oil that everything is going to be fine.
Hmm.
And I also like to say that Matey does. There's lots of legal AI software out there that helps lawyers do the things that they already love to do and automates the things that they love to do.
Hmm.
And Matey is helping them do the things that they don't like to do, and in fact, in many cases, have already pushed outsource or outside of their firm. So, in those sense, like they're very skeptical, and we want to address that. But I would also say, and I say this is not my words; these are the words of criminal defense attorneys that I've talked to, and I've met hundreds over the past couple of 3 years. And they describe themselves not only as to be a lawyer, you almost have to be a bit objectionable.
Hmm.
To be a criminal defense lawyer, you almost have to have oppositional defiance disorder. And so they're extraordinarily skeptical because they're also like, they're fighting with one hand tied behind their back. Winning, they lose 90% of their cases, and winning is beating the plea deal. And so it's not getting the guy off of a crime he maybe didn't commit, although we have done that. I'd love to talk about it at some point. But they essentially go in and lose every day. And so then, their skepticism is at extraordinary heights.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course,
So,
absolutely. So one thing you wrote is a line that I actually love. You said, "We'll never ask you to just trust the AI. We'll show our work." So when you're in front of a defense attorney who has been burned by a flashy demo, multiple demos, like you said, what's the exact thing that you show them that makes them flip?
um, you know, what I love to do is use one of their cases into the system. So, like, put a case in that you know something about, right? And I don't care if it took you guys 4 weeks to find an answer in that system. Here, send me the Google Drive link for your case. I'll import it while we're talking, and then we'll drop into our chat window and we'll ask the question off the cuff. What do you want to know about this? And here it is. Boom. You get the answer a couple minutes later. Sometimes it takes a little while, 5 minutes, because you're processing a bunch of data. But at the end of the day, you show them proof is in the pudding. This is something that took your team, 40 hours of labor to discover this answer, which might have cost your client $30,000 to do all of this, because lawyers are not inexpensive.
Hmm.
Uh, and importantly, you get this answer quicker, which means that you now can actually give better representation to your client. It's not just about the fact that the client could have spent that 30 grand and they didn't. It's about the fact that you might have needed to know that answer while you're in a courtroom, and you don't have that number of hours to go find the answer. You don't get a recess that long. That's the proof in the pudding for us. And getting them to that point is the hard part. That's the challenge. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to work through navigate that system. But if you can get them to put data in the system, they're going to be a customer.
So, all right, that's very interesting because yeah, look, a lawyer in the UK just to have an initial consultation is in the range of 250 to £500 an hour.
Yeah,
And imagine you need, like, I'm about to lose my job and I need to know if I have a leg to stand on with this contract. And you're like down to your last penny and you've got a family. How the hell are you going to afford a lawyer? Like, you are absolutely
yeah,
screwed. So I think lawyers do need to be smart because I don't want to pay a lawyer 250 bucks an hour to answer one question. I'm guessing I would want to come to Matey AI so they could facilitate that in a much more cost effective manner. So let's play this at the trust sale, right? Your buyer is a lawyer who does not care about how the model works, only whether it holds up in court. So how do you sell something as invisible as trust to someone that's skeptical?
well, everything that we generate, every outcome from Matey, whenever you use the product, what is the work product what is the end result? You ask that
Mhm.
question. It's generally speaking, I want to know the answer to whether or not this person was harassed, or I want to know the answer to all the examples of instances where someone did something that is in dispute here. In our particular case, that's generally what we're up against. It could also be, we've seen everything from, um, you know, uh, mass torts or class action lawsuits, all the way to an individual suing because or being sued because of a non-compete type situation. Ultimately, the every one of the examples that you give have to be referenced to something in the actual source material. That is how you
Hmm.
actually establish trust.
Hmm.
And I've always been baffled. I've truly been baffled at the instances from these other legal AI systems that are hallucinating case law, because it's really easy to find the case law by name. And so, wouldn't you just go extract all the case law references after you've generated the work product and say, can I find this in Westlaw, or can I find this in some, Lexis? And
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
can't, you have a really good reason for going back and reviewing that. This is a sort of feedback loop that I've been baffled that no one has incorporated, but it's the kind of feedback loops that we put into our system, checks and balances that we put in. That's how we can establish trust. And I'll tell you this: we also we just purged a historical record of a database table that had 1 billion jobs in it, so 1 billion executions of various things that happen whenever we're solving problems. That
Hmm.
billion, those 1 billion jobs that ran were generating something like 200,000 answers that have been put through the system. Okay. So whenever you think about that, that's a lot of work that's been done to make sure that those 200,000 answers are correct. That's the kind of metrics that you can use to establish, like, do we
Hmm.
have a reason for believing that we're accurate here?
Yeah.
And this is again back to my original point where I said, maybe it's prior to the show, but we're not just putting this into a large context window and hoping that the models don't do us dirty. There's very specific algorithms that we use for establishing outputs and understanding where those outputs came from throughout the entire process, and forcing these models to essentially um, cite their sources literally and
So
prove their work.
I find that interesting. So one thing I heard yesterday, I was watching the All In podcast. I don't know if you know Nikesh Arora from Palo Alto Networks, and he was saying that a lot of these companies want to build their own products and they want to do their own things around development. But what they fail to realize is the failure rate, the error rate when they are trying these projects. And it's in the range. I don't know if he's referring to cybersecurity specifically, but it was in the range of like 30%. So when you are putting in that information and you are providing a feedback loop, right? Like, I don't know if you're able to answer this, but is there a level of accuracy that you can guarantee on every one of your answers? And if it's
Well,
not 100%, how do you say it's 95% right?
yeah. A percentile is a really, or percentage accuracy is a really interesting way of thinking about it. What we tend to say is that 100% of the statements made by our engine must be cited to a source, because we can say that either one, you've provided us some template of a document that you'd like to generate. It might be sprinkled in with a bunch of questions that need to be sourced from the corpus of data that you have in your platform, or it is like you've just generally asked a question for the platform, like, show me the examples where Shane was done wrong by his manager at his job, etc. Every one of those outputs need to be sourced to a specific part of the text, either the original prompt that the user gave us with their template or the
Hmm.
original corpus of data. And so we essentially don't allow things to be emitted into the output unless it has a citation. And so we had tried to obtain, in that sense, 100% accuracy rate. I can't attest, for example, that what's in the data set was accurate, but I can attest where we established that verbiage or that text from,
Hmm.
or maybe it's the images that were described. So there's, you can also think about this from, think about the multimodal data that we put into the platform. We have video, we have audio, we transcribe that has an accuracy percentage, right?
Yeah.
So, and we generally trust it, although every person would want to verify that transcription before they relied upon it in the courtroom. They should go
Yeah.
listen to that audio. So not only do we source the audio transcription, but we source the original file so that they can go look at it. And this is the other thing that we do. Um, the other thing that we do is we force that, um, every we basically have the lawyers assert this is your work product, this is not ours. At the end of the day, if you're presenting this to a courtroom, it's still upon you as a lawyer. You took the ethical vow or oath to
Validate
understand,
this. Yeah.
yeah, to validate this. And so it's not just sort of like we're promising you your output. There's still lawyers that do that. I think that's where they get into trouble with the hallucinated case law and so forth. But it's essentially a bit of a disclaimer in our platform that, hey, by the way, you should still verify all of this. Like at the end of the
Of
day, we haven't
course.
had hallucinations that we're aware of, but you should
Yeah.
verify this.
Yeah, because look, again, to my point on what I'm seeing too, even if I'm running, let's just say a number of sales scenarios or simulations in Claude, it will make stuff up.
Yeah.
And it will come up with stuff. And that's why I think having your own personalized model is very interesting. So I want to ask something that may not be really clear right now to the network. So you have a product called Matey AI that lawyers use to process, analyze, deliver information to their clients based on their cases faster or to them. Now, is there ever a point where, let's say, I don't want to pay the lawyer right away? Does Matey, do I get to talk to Matey before I talk to the lawyer? And does Matey then recommend the lawyers? Like, how does it actually work then from the moment of here's the consumer, here's the lawyer, and then what are their paths to being a customer of yours?
So, wonderful question there. I would actually love a world in which the way that the clients transmit their data to their lawyer is via Matey. In fact, in my own personal life, hiring a lawyer for personal reasons or whatever, that's how I have done it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love it whenever the lawyers are actually transmitting that data to opposing counsel when needed via Matey. And then that other lawyer now gets a login. We give them a few free queries, and then they get kind of hooked on the product. Because again, once you get them to the point where they can use it on their data, they're
Yep.
generally going to become a customer. Once
Yep.
you get them to that point, it's like a 70% conversion rate, 80% conversion rate, and
Wow.
so it's huge. But the ultimately, right now we don't sell to consumer directly. We sell largely. Our customer base is a what we call the civilian lawyer, and I refer to the civilian lawyer as the lawyer who's
Municipal? Is it like
no,
a municipal lawyer?
it's the lawyers whose clients are individuals, not corporations. And
Okay. All
so,
right.
right
Yep.
now, of course, we sell to corporate lawyers. That's where all the money is.
Mm-hmm.
But think of all the instances like employment, construction. If you built, hired a contractor, obviously family law, criminal defense law, all of those sorts of areas where the individuals that are hiring the lawyer is an individual, where the entity hiring the lawyer is not a company, it's an
Yeah.
individual.
Yeah.
Those are fantastic places for us to lean into this idea that the party who has the complaint or the lawsuit can start in Matey, and then maybe potentially we could have a marketplace for lawyers who kind of bid on the work based off of what they see going on in the data set. And so the AI could actually glean from the data set initially, give sort of a high level summary that would not violate confidentiality, and then people can say, yeah, I'd love to take this. So that's something that we have planned for the future. We're not focusing on that at the moment. We're still a very small startup, but
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I hope and dream for at the end of the day, because I honestly think that that's an underserved area of the market.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll say one last thing about this, which is that I was speaking with a wonderful lady, Miss Bridget Mary McCormack, who's currently the head of the American Arbitration Association, was former state Supreme Court justice in Michigan. And she and I had a conversation about access to justice, because it's something that we're very passionate about. And the statistic that she quoted to me is that basically the individual who needs a lawyer is basically underserved by 92%. So only 8% of them actually find a lawyer at the end of the day. The other 92% are just either handling matters themselves or like pro se, or just the matter doesn't go resolved. So there's a huge gap in legal services that are not being served at all right now. And I think the AI will help to address that problem.
Well, look, it makes a lot of sense. Now, one thing you said was we're not a wrapper. You
Yep.
said we're an engine, and every competitor they claim the same thing. So when the whole market sounds identical to that same lawyer, that buyer that you're speaking to, how do you guys actually make the difference land in a sales conversation?
Yeah, I think again, it's really back to the outcome, not to the process. In terms of landing in a sales conversation, they want to see that their data that they put into the system that they understand or would like to understand produces information that they otherwise wouldn't have gotten. There aren't a lot of companies that are AI native doing what we're doing. There's a bunch of bolt-ons
Hmm.
and for legacy players, but that comes with pros and cons. You know, I'd love to be in the place of the legacy players that have all the revenue, but also they don't have a huge They don't have a huge. They're not giving folks the opportunity to test these products for free or for a minimal amount of money. So not
Okay.
only are they paying their initial amount of money to put their case into the system, which is exorbitant, sometimes $30,000. On top of that, we're going to charge you more for this AI feature that is also, by the way, a little weak sauce. And we understand why it's weak sauce. Because fundamentally, this starts with the way that you actually store your data. It's not just like that you can take an existing SQL database that you've been storing data in for a long time. Maybe you do some keyword searches and then you can add AI to that. That is not going to work. It will not get you very far. We fundamentally have our own sort of storage layer. The way that we architected that is specifically for the purposes of what we're trying to do.
Hmm.
And it's AI native at the onset. It's not an after effect. Those are the kinds of things that we say to our customers, but again, they don't really care that much. They're not a highly technical customer base. They're skeptical of it. And one example that I gave my team was, basically, whenever Stephen Hawking wrote Brief History of Time, in the foreword of that book, he mentions how his editor told him, "You're going to cut in half your sales of this book for every mathematical formula you have in the book." And so he's like, "Cool, I'm going to write a book with no mathematical formulas." I say that to my sales team, which is like every technical word that you use for a lawyer cuts the percentage that they're going to believe you and close, and
That's
by some
very,
number. I don't
yeah,
know if
that's
it's
very
5%.
clever. Yep.
So then don't use any. So show them. You can show them what the world looks like. You don't have to tell them how the technology works because they don't want to know. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. So you built this for under-resourced public defenders and equal access to justice. You're also venture-backed and you have to
Yep.
scale revenue. So where do those two pull against each other and which one wins when they fight?
Well, generally the people that are providing the money win. And so the public defenders, we've got a lot of success in the public defender offices. Like we've seen great traction there. The individual criminal defense lawyer is generally speaking under resourced, even as compared to the under resourced public defenders.
Okay.
And so, but you can still make a wonderful business out of that. Um, and we knew, for example, we knew that if we could make this business work and our cost of goods sold be appropriate for the lowest funded resource or customer in the marketplace, that we could always go compete with the legacy players and have a much better product, much better experience, and so forth at their price points, which are like literally sometimes 50 times the amount of money that these criminal defense lawyers have to spend. So that's why I said earlier, criminal defense was our initial wedge market, and we'll still continue to serve them by all means. We also serve the prosecution side of the equation, which is oftentimes also underfunded and overworked, and has a better network effect, by the way, because they're distributing data to all of these criminal defense lawyers. So we're like,
Yeah.
cool, we'll give you even further discounts if you use it to distribute. Now they get to sign up. Now they are likely to convert. But again, to the civil litigation where it's a corporation that's paying the bill and has $250,000 to spend on this matter versus a $2,500 DUI. I mean, it's just like a fundamentally different calculation in terms of how much money they're willing to spend on their data, and that's why I say we built enough product to service the criminal defense space. We've matured the product to that point. We've now matured the product to the point where we can start to serve the civil space, and then that sales hockey stick is starting. We're starting to see it happen.
That's amazing. So for a revenue leader that's selling into a market that has stopped believing the hype, what is the one move they can make this week to win back trust?
Man, I think you have to demonstrate that your product actually adds value. And I think that the best way of doing it is to essentially exhibit that on the customer's problem space, whatever that might be, you know,
In their
uh,
data.
in their data. in their data for their day to day. You have to demonstrate for them that this is not, something that you're going to pay for, never hear from us again, and never get any value out of. I think you should be willing to white glove that experience for those customers.
Yeah.
We do a lot of this. One of the things we do is we would sell to these law firms and there's 50 cases that they need to put into our system. I'm like, absolutely not. You can put 3 cases in because we're going to white glove those 3 cases with you.
Yeah.
And then we'll take you from 3 cases to 50 cases, over the next 6 months. But making sure that initial experience is golden. And by the way, we have not always succeeded at this, and that falls to me. There's been plenty of times I fell down on the job and just couldn't do enough. And I was like, that's why I was like, hey, we have to sell 3 case compartments, not 50. It's just too much for me right now. Or for our team. You have to have those experiences be magical. And if it's not magical, then what are they buying it for?
Look, it's exactly what we say. It's exactly what we say. Nothing happens without the customer really exceeding the value they had perceived. So let's wrap up the show with this. You had one interesting case study where you said you beat the case. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Walk us through that.
All right. Yes. Obviously, there's a few things that I can say, and I'll be very vague about this for reasons of confidentiality, for obvious reasons of confidentiality. There was a case. There was a gentleman who was charged with five counts of crime, 3 of which were capital crimes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So massive issue. He's convicted of this in, I think, 2018. Incident happened in 2018 or late 2017. He's convicted in 2018. Now, the same law firm contacted us in 2025, last year. So we're talking about 7 years of time they've had this case. They were able to successfully appeal his original conviction, and they won that appeal. Prosecution appealed it, so it went to the state Supreme Court. And the state Supreme Court awarded them a new trial. So we've had 3 times that we've tried this case. And they were able to get a fresh trial, and they finally go to trial in 2025. So they prepared for another 2 years. They go to trial in 2025. They used Matey on the last 7 days before trial. So the trial was last July 10th, and they started, I think, becoming a customer June 30th, or July 1st. They used data that they gleaned from Matey that they have not seen for 7 years of trying this case 3 different times and studying this case in the exact same law firm for 3 different instances of going to court. They're able to use Matey to gather information out of this case to prove innocence. And that young man was acquitted in his new trial on all 5 counts. So he's walking free. So I like to say, listen, man, you don't have to, we're not here to advertise acquittals, right?
Yeah.
There are people that honestly, they deserve to go to jail and hopefully be rehabilitated. But we can do that with the right people, not the wrong people.
Yes.
So truth is essentially the metric that we're optimizing for here, not acquittals or convictions. And but it was honestly, that's what keeps us getting up in the morning, is knowing that, hey, that young man was going to be in prison essentially until he died. They don't have capital punishment. They don't have the death penalty, but otherwise, they were capital offenses. So he's going to be in jail the rest of his entire life. He's 18 years old, or started whenever he's 18 years old. That's a really cool thing that we were able to do.
That's huge.
And it's huge, and it's honestly, that's part of that proof in the pudding, is to say, hey, did you actually get value out of this? And I don't think we charged them for that case. That was their first case, but then they spent a bunch of money with us, since then. So
yeah,
it makes all the difference in the world.
Mate, look, I think that's the best way to wrap up the show, on a very high note, on a big win. So, Jared, if there's any last words, where can people find you, learn more, speak with you directly? Where do they go for that?
So our website, matey.ai, matey.ai.
Yeah.
And my name is Jared, Jared, and you can email me any day of the week, jared@matey.ai. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, and let's say hello.
All right, cool. That's it. That's the pod, guys. That's a wrap. So.
Awesome.